Okay. You have closely interacted with Shastriji. What kind of a human being was he?
Well, really, I think I must mention that I did not know him early on when he used to be a cabinet minister.
One second. When you answer, you have to begin by saying, I'll ask again, okay? Sorry. So we were about your interaction with Shastriji and about what sort of a human being did you find him?
I never really knew Shastriji early on. I really got to know him in about 1965 when I was Chief of Air Staff, and also situations in the country was getting a little dangerous. And then I interacted with him a lot. He used to see me early on before the war, before the 1965 war, practically every week to discuss things, to find out what the Air Force can do or cannot do. He did the same thing with the Army. And I think I really got to know him very well because I was living almost 100 yards away from him. And many times I get a telephone call about 9 o'clock, 9:30. Could I see him? And he discussed things very informally. Many times he's sitting without the chappals and so on, and he talked all in a very friendly manner. Now I think what I gathered really was that he was first of all a very simple man, secondly a very honest man, and thirdly very inquisitive. Outside, he didn't give the impression that he wants to be too inquisitive, but he asked a lot of questions about what we can do, what we cannot do. And I think my impression of him was, as a human being, a very kind person, but also quite firm.
Would you like to share one or two incidents which has really left an impression in your mind or in you?
Well, actually, yeah, I'm glad you asked that. What left an impression on me about his personality was that I used to be dressed in a suit, probably to go to a party and so on. And he used to keep on apologizing off and on that he's very sorry he's delaying me. He knows I'm going for a party. And a few times he always came right out of the car to see me off. Now, a Prime Minister seeing a Mayor, Chief of Air Staff, I think it shows his great personality and shows the confidence he has, you see. The people who want to be aloof, introverts and so on, they have really no confidence. So he showed full of confidence all the time, but never raised his voice. He was never abrupt, and he gave the impression that he was thinking as to how you are feeling by being there so late.
What you have been saying is about a human being. Now, what would you say about Lal Bahadur Shastri ji as a leader of a country like India?
Well, I think he wasn't a person who tried to impose his leadership. He was a person who earned his leadership by asking questions, by getting to know things, and by taking decisions. And I'll come to that later, because how his personality affected the whole of 1965 operations.
During wartime of 1965, how would you describe his leadership?
Well, in my opinion, the defense people could not have a better Prime Minister during operations. He consulted you at every step. He gave his own opinions. He laid down the criteria and the parameters for operations. And after that, he actually allowed us to do what was agreed by him in the overall sense. There was no interference in either the military operations or day-to-day interference of any kind, or interference about commanders. He only dealt with the heads. He didn't try to deal with the lower commanders. And I think the big failing in 1962, from which he must have learned lessons, that there was too much political interference in the functioning of the army and the commanders. And that was one reason, I think, that we had all those setbacks. In my opinion, it wasn't really the weaknesses of the services, but at that time it was the weakness of the political leadership.
Would you be remembering any particular incident, a moment, while all these operations were going on, which struck you most about his decision?
Well, I think first of all, before the operation started, he had given me one instruction quite clearly. And that shows his humanity, I think, his human attitude. He said, try not to take on the civilian targets where civilians are killed. He said, this is purely a military fight, and therefore do what you can to destroy, to attack the military forces, but do avoid any civilian casualties. He realized that there will be some civilian casualties, but he said, do not do that intentionally. Now I thought that was a very good decision.
Is it fair to say that the Pakistanis had underestimated his resolve?
Well, actually, that I'm afraid Pakistanis till that time underestimated the resolve of India, and they must have underestimated his resolve. But I just go into this. The actual, you can say, trouble started in early August 1965, only in Jammu and Kashmir. Now, why Pakistan attacked there was that they felt that the uprising of the people, they will disturb all the communications, they will also interfere with the operations of the Indian Army, Indian Defence Forces, and they would be able to have some hold over the valley. Now, incidentally, they failed in that miserably because the people did not support them. And also the Army, the Air Force, were fully prepared to face that kind of danger. Now, later on, purely because they failed in the valley, Pakistan's actual regular forces with tanks and so on, now the terrorists can't have tanks, militants can't have tanks. Tanks are only owned by the regular forces. They attacked India still within the LOC in Chamjauria. Now that is important. They wanted to limit the war within Jammu and Kashmir and only up to the LOC, not go on to even the main border. So, and it was when they discovered that they were not successful in their ambition at that time, then they attacked Chamjauria, hoping that they would be able to cut Poonch, Rajouri, Akhnur, Udhampur and so on. Even before that, I think Shastri ji, and I must say even the earlier prime ministers had quite definitely stated that any attack on Jammu and Kashmir by the regular forces will be considered as a war against India. So, and he said that also during the August, this terrorist activities, Pakistan infiltration and so on, that it must stop. Otherwise, there can be a war. And I think he warned them even then that we may be left with no option but to go to war. The 1965 main war was started by India when we attacked near Amritsar or Wagah and so on, you see. But that was also because we found that they were having a bit of toehold in Chamjauria. And our interest was to stop them there and take them somewhere else. Now, in operations, actually, we all know that you must choose a place yourself to fight, not the place which the enemy chooses to fight. And we chose the place which suited us because of our deployment and because of our bases and because of support we could get from the public also and so on, you see. So that is how the whole thing happened. And that decision naturally to go to war is always taken by the Prime Minister on the advice of the Chiefs of Staff and on the advice primarily, in this case, primarily Army Chief and the Air Force Chief.
So what you are saying is that the Pakistanis did not underestimate him, but they underestimated India as a whole.
No, I would put it the other way around actually. I think Pakistan always had so much faith in their own defense forces. By the American build-up with all the tanks and with all the sabers and so on, all the military equipment they got, I think they overassessed their ability. I don't think they thought, and they always thought that their soldier is better in fighting than our soldier. Now that is a misconception. That's a wrong idea to start off, you see. Because, I mean, in fighting, these things are not like that. People fight for their, incidentally, people fight for their religion, people fight for their country, people fight for their village, people fight for their, and they have a lot of kind of emotion to fight, you know, a lot of desire to fight. And I think it was because of their overassessment of themselves and underassessment of India that they were doing all this in sticking to Jammu and Kashmir. Also, they never thought that India will ever attack on the main border. This was the first time in 1947-48, as you know. We had the opportunity, but we didn't attack Pakistan. This time they also thought that they won't attack because they say India will be very cautious, India will be too careful, India will be afraid of their defense, of the might of their defense forces, that they never thought that India will start the war.
So even though they overassessed and underestimated to some level, so how would you see the role of Shastriji at that point, and how did he counter such a scenario?
Well, I think I would say that you see, the political role is very important. We found that he was a Prime Minister who allowed full latitude to the military people without interference and without trying to enforce any political ideas. He understood that first of all the battle has to be won before political side comes in. And he, in my case, I remember from personal things and so on, he used to discuss everything with me and then broadly say things like don't attack East Pakistan, don't attack this, don't attack public and so on, you see. But otherwise he said you can do whatever you can against their military, which we did. Now, see that is so that to achieve results in military operation, the least minimum political influence is required.
By the time the UN called for a ceasefire, the Indian forces had almost overwhelmed the Pakistanis militarily. Your comments?
Well, I would say that in fact, I was consulted in that by Shastriji, and I remember mentioning to him. And by the way, it's given in Srinivasa's book, which you must have read. Have you read Srinivasa's book? No. Well, he given the whole. I had advised Shastriji that we are absolutely comfortable in the Air Force. We haven't suffered many losses. People's morale is very high. We are doing extremely well in our operations. And he said, I wouldn't suggest accepting the ceasefire. Now, I think Army had slightly different views. And I'm sure that he decided for a ceasefire after consulting all the services and probably his colleagues. And of course, these things, he was not a man to come under pressure. When these things happen, there's a lot of international pressure. And if you come under that, then you cave in. He didn't. But somehow I think he ultimately decided, probably for the good of both countries, to accept the ceasefire.
But you slightly view things differently. You
My views are quite different. I mean, put to him very politely, but saying that the Indian Air Force is still fully operational, there's no drawback at all. People are very happy fighting. After all, that is our business. So he was really, he was quite satisfied with that. And I think, he even after the war and so on, he had very good impressions about the Air Force fighting. He said, he and both Y.B. Chaban said a lot of good things about the Air Force. And individually, I think probably undeservedly, I benefited a lot.
Finally, how would you like to remember Lal Bahadur Shastri?
Well, I would say that I would really remember him as a great Prime Minister, first of all. Mainly because I don't know how he dealt with other ministries and so on, but his dealings with defense were very, very good, very decisive. Defense people like decisive, good decisions, firm decisions, and those were there. And he accepted a lot of our requests which arose during the operation, even for the welfare of Jawans, of all the three services. And I think I got to, at least certainly a biased view, because I got very fond of him. And I am still fond of him. His memory is very alive with me, So I can't really say any further.